Well, hello. We're getting ready to come down the home stretch in the course, and so very exciting. We're going to be wrapping up Module 8 this week. There is something a little bit different in the procedure this week as we complete the course. It ends a few days earlier than normal. You're used to having until Sunday night to complete a module, and this time, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but the course has to end on Friday, July 13th. So your deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, July 13th. Make sure everything is in before that deadline. Two things I want to do in this video this time. This is going to be the last video that I create. And what we're going to do first is we're going to revisit the first capstone assignment, the win-win or integrative negotiation role play. We're going to talk a little bit about that now that all the results are in. Your papers were for me to evaluate your process so that I could see that you learned the course instruction, that you understand it, and then that you can correctly apply that learning to a novel and realistic negotiation encounter. Okay, so now we're in a position that the results are in to look at those outcomes. Okay, so we'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll shift gears to the second capstone, the one on positional or distributive negotiation, because you have to complete that role play and turn in your role play paper for that before the end of Module 8. So let's dive in here. Integrative negotiation is about creating value. By creating value, what I mean is the negotiator's task is to create an agreement that maximizes to the fullest extent possible the interests of both sides. That's why Fisher, Urey, and Patton talk so much about underlying interests, uncovering those interests, and then creating options that might satisfy to the fullest extent possible those respective interests, and developing standards so that once they have a long list of options, they can figure out which one is the best. Okay, so in integrative negotiation, our task is to create value first, to push off of that zero-sum line, to make the pie bigger, and then after we've done that, it is appropriate to claim value. In an integrative scenario, what we're trying to do is to maximize joint gain. So we need to create value, and that would involve things like log rolling or contingent contracts or cutting the cost of compliance or bridge solutions. We've talked about different types of ways of creating options that makes the pie bigger, that creates value for both sides. And then after that we have to split the pie, okay? And to create a truly integrative agreement, we have to, after we've created the value, we have to split the pie, okay? So we don't have a lopsided agreement. So we're talking about a Pareto efficient frontier. We've described this before in the course. It's that point at which no money is left on the table. We've created an agreement to where if we were to do anything else, there'd be nothing left we could do to create value for one side without taking it away from another side. Okay, so that's the concept. And now we'll look at the results from this section. You're looking at the spreadsheet here that I've already posted for you. In Module 7, you used this as the basis for one of your discussion posts, but here it is again. And this is showing you the actual results. Now, of course, when you got your confidential role information, I said you are welcome to do some other things. If you want to introduce some other issues that are not on your confidential success table, you're welcome to do that. If you want to create contingent contracts of some sort, so basically have performance contingencies that are tied to Ronaldo Rio's temper or health, you're free to do that. But I also told you that for the lion's share, that those interests that were in your confidential success table and the points associated with each of the possible settlements, those were your marching orders. Just like in real life, if you go into a negotiation on behalf of someone else and they give you some marching orders and they tell you it has to be pretty much within these parameters, well, that's your assignment, okay? And so what this allows us to do is something quite unique that you don't get in any other type of setting. You go and buy a car, you cannot compare your negotiation even to someone else who bought the same type of car because they bought it at a different dealership at a different period of time. and under maybe different circumstances. Here we're holding everything constant. Everyone got the same course instruction. Everyone in Ronaldio's role got or Ronaldio's agent's role got the same information. Everyone representing Realistic Madrid got the same information. So we are holding everything constant, and the only thing left to vary is how well each individual student applies what they've learned, and of course in conjunction with the partner that they've been randomly assigned to. Okay, so this gives us a laboratory environment in which that allows us to compare settlements against each other. And you'll notice some situations where the parties seem to do well for themselves and have little spread between them. And you'll see some other situations where one party did really well, got a very high percentage of points that were possible for their role, but that came at the expense of their partner. Their partner did not do very well in terms of gaining a big share of the pie. And in that situation, it looks like value was claimed, not really created. Okay, and so this gives us an opportunity to reflect back and to think, well, are there opportunities where money might have been left on the table? What is the Pareto efficient solution? In this role play, like I said, that you were to approach this as most of the value being wrapped up in the issues that I laid out before you according to the point schedule that I gave you. And so if we analyze the negotiation from that standpoint, we can identify a compatible issue, the mural. Both sides wanted this for their own reasons, and both parties got a lot of value out of reaching agreement on having this mural, okay? This was 4,000 points that went to both sides from agreeing to, it's a compatible issue, and in an integrative negotiation, you want to find those compatible issues and you want to settle on them. They're in both parties' best interest to do so. Interesting side note, I did see instances in reading your papers where there were some students who looked at this mural and said, I'm going to pretend I'm not really interested in the mural, even though I am, okay? And I'm going to use that to create leverage to get more or less of something else that I want. For example, well, I'll only let Ronaldo paint the mural if he's willing to go down $1 million in fixed salary, okay? And that's distributive. That's a distributive tactic. Feigning interest on something you really care about to gain something on something else, that's a distributive tactic. How would you approach this integrative? Like I already said, if it's something both parties want, both parties should say, this should be an easy one. Yes, we want that. Wrap it up, I'll take it. How can you prevent yourself in an integrative scenario where here is value just sitting there waiting to be created, and the other person tries to make it a bargaining chip? How do you keep yourself from being taken advantage of in that case? Because if you were the person who relented to a demand like that, that's what happened to you, okay? You could have done better for yourself than you did. So how can you protect yourself in that situation? That's why it's very, very important before you go to the negotiation table, you've identified what the compatible issues are or likely to be. And once the negotiation starts, don't start making offers. Okay, you need to exchange information. In reading the papers, I saw a lot of cases where I would get to the part where you're telling me about how your negotiation unfolded, and you said, well, I made the opening offer, or they made the opening offer. You shouldn't be making any opening offers when the negotiation begins. If you're in an integrative negotiation, you shouldn't be making offers. It's not the time to make offers. You're supposed to be exchanging information on interest. You're supposed to be creating an agenda for the negotiation and exchanging information on interests, and then using that to create options that satisfy those interests. That's when you can float the possibility. What do you think about this package? What do you think about that package? Here are two packages. Which one do you prefer? Okay. So how do you protect yourself? If you already know that this mural is something that creates value for both sides, then you say, look, I'm offering you the opportunity for the rising tide that lifts both boats. No, I'm not going to tie that to sacrificing salary, okay? If we agree to this mural, it's going to put money in your pocket. And if I agree to a salary reduction, that also puts money in your pocket and it takes it out of mine. And I'm not going to agree to that. See, that's how you handle that. Okay, but value could be created immediately by coming to agreement on the compatible issue. You can log roll on the signing bonus and promotional trips. If you look at your confidential role information, one of these was very important to one party, okay, and they didn't care very much about the other, okay, and that was the mirror opposite of the preferences of the other side, okay. So if we agree to a settlement that has few promotional trips, okay, and the maximum signing bonus, okay, that provides, or the, let's see, I need to look at that again. I may have zigged when I should have zagged. Let me look again. But the point is, it's like the sister. Here's the point. It's like the sisters with the orange. Okay, one sister wants the rind, they don't care about the pulp. The other sister cares about the pulp, doesn't care about the rind, and they trade. Okay, and so if both parties realize that they place differential value on these two issues, then they trade. Okay, you have your top choice on this, and I'll take my least choice. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, and we'll flip. Right? Okay, and so that's 3,600 points then to each party if they get the log rolling solution. Excuse me. Okay, and then finally we have some issues, the salary and the contract length. These are fixed pie issues, and so there might be things we can do again to create more value by creating contingencies or things like this. But just looking at the numbers themselves in the confidential success table, if we compromise on those, which remember is the least integrative that we can be, but sometimes that's the best you can do, and on a fixed pie issue, compromise is the best you can do. It doesn't create any value like these others do, but sometimes that's the best, and we get those fixed pie issues, you split them right down the middle, that's 7,500 points to each party. You add those up, that's a grand total of 15,100 points, which is about 74% of possible points to each player in those respective roles with zero spread between them. Okay, we created the value, made a bigger pie, and then we split the pie in half. That's the Pareto efficient solution here. Again, there's some additional bells and whistles you could add on to this thing, but this is to show you standardized apples-to-apples solution. This is a neat way of being able to get you some real feedback in kind of an artificial but realistic environment. Okay, so that's that. The next thing I want to talk about then is distributive bargaining, distributive negotiation. There's a part of your role play paper where you have to evaluate the agreement that you reached, okay? And so earlier I made a video where I said, well, how do you evaluate an integrative agreement? You don't negotiate to get a deal, you negotiate to get a good deal. And if you choose integrative negotiation, how do you know you got a good deal? You don't just tell me what the terms are, as some people did in their paper. You have to tell me how that created joint gain. You have to tell me how the terms of this agreement maximized Rinalrio's interests and how this agreement maximized Realistic Madrid's interests, how it did both, how there is a win-win. To what extent did both parties win? And if all you're saying is we split the pie, we compromised or whatever, there were value-creating opportunities right at your fingertips. You left money on the table if you didn't go into that, okay? So compromising alone doesn't create any value. So we talked about that. There was a video before where we went through all that. Now we're talking about evaluating a distributive agreement. Again, you don't negotiate to get a deal. You negotiate to get a good deal. How do you know a good distributive agreement when you see one? That's what we have to talk about. So the distributive negotiation is about claiming value. We have a fixed pie of resources. You like pie, I like pie. The winner in a distributive negotiation is whoever gets the biggest slice of pie. How do we know that? Okay, let's look back at our Zopa diagram here. The range, the bargaining range is defined by the buyers and sellers opening offer. That establishes the outermost range. The zone of potential agreement is smaller than that because it's defined by the overlap in the negotiator's respective resistance points. Here's the frustrating thing about the Zopa. You don't know what it is. You don't know what the other party's resistance point is. You might know what their BATNA is, but you won't know what their resistance point is. Not if, and they might tell you what their resistance point is, but if they do, they're probably lying, okay? So, but let's look at the diagram here so that we can think through the concepts that are involved. And as you see, we have a positive bargaining zone because the resistance points between the buyer and seller overlap. That creates the pie, okay? And so if we look at that area of overlap, if this is the area of overlap in my chart here between the resistance points between the buyer and seller, if we take exactly half of that, and that's the point at which we reach an agreement, then the pie has been split in half 50-50. Okay, it's a compromise. Okay, both parties won equally, both parties lost equally. Okay, it's a compromise, pure compromise. Okay, if the settlement is at or real close to one party's resistance point, then the other party won. They claimed most of that pie, and vice versa. Okay. Now, again, because you will not know the other person's resistance point, how can you evaluate a distributive solution? First is the quality of your planning and preparation. If you've done a good job, you've done your homework well on this, you know what a good target is. You're supposed to set an aspiration. You're supposed to set, as Dawson called it, your maximum plausible position, a target that is the most you can reasonably justify. Okay. Well, actually, excuse me, your maximum plausible position is your opening offers, excuse me. But your target is where you realistically, ambitiously expect to settle. That's what you're going for, okay? Your maximum plausible position, your opening offer is going to be more extreme than that, and that way you can make concessions and still reach or hopefully even beat your target. That's what you're going for here. So your target is what you should concentrate on during the negotiation. It should be an ambitious goal. Okay, it should be aspirational, and that's where your focus should be during the negotiation, as Shell says. A lot of times we get distracted by all these points of reference. We want to anchor on our target, not on something less than our target. Okay, for all the reasons that Shell already described. After the negotiation, when you're doing your postmortem, here are some other reference points that you can consult to figure out who got the biggest share of the fixed pie. Your resistance point and your BATNA. If you reached a deal that is less optimal than your BATNA, you shouldn't have reached agreement. Because you don't negotiate to get a deal, you negotiate to get a good deal. And if you got a deal that makes you worse off than your BATNA, you shouldn't have reached an agreement. You should have gone to your BATNA instead. Okay? So your settlement terms should be way better than your BATNA, should be way better than your resistance point. You won't know the other side's resistance point, but you might be able to learn their BATNA. Now again, what's the difference between a resistance point and a BATNA? A resistance point is subjective. They're not going to tell you, or if they do tell you, they're going to lie about it probably. You're not going to have any way of verifying that. It's going to be cheap talk, okay? Easy for them to say and impossible for you to verify. BATNAs, on the other hand, are more objective. They could be verified. Think about the newspaper reporter who was interested in buying that fancy globe. And he goes into the store, he tells the salesperson, he makes something up, pulls it right out of his rear end and says, you know, I saw the same thing in an online catalog for, you know, X dollars cheaper or whatever. That is something that the salesperson could verify. So you give me the details, I can go look that up for myself, right? And so the other person's resistance point might not match their BATNA, but they're probably pretty close. And so it'd be a reasonable approximation. And so the closer you can force a settlement or produce a settlement to the other person's BATNA, which is objective and verifiable, theoretically, that you claim the bigger share of the pie. Okay, so these are some metrics that you can use. And how many should you use? All of them. They're all at your disposal. They're all at your fingertips. During the negotiation, you want to keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes focused on the target, your aspiration, okay? Don't get distracted by your BATNA or your resistance point. If you can build in a tripwire, if you think things are not going well, to kind of build in some minimal level of protection for yourself if you're not reaching your target, okay? But keep your eyes to the fullest extent possible on your target during the negotiation, because that's what you're striving for, okay? But then after the fact, after the dust is settled and you're doing your postmortem, look at these other reference points as well so that you can see how you can make a case for how you did. And very important, just like I told you last time, don't ever make an effort to justify a bad outcome. If you got hosed, own up to it. Okay, if you didn't do well, you say, well, I came nowhere close to my target. I settled just a little bit better than my BATNA. I woulda, coulda, shoulda done a lot better. Don't sweep that under the rug, okay? Take that learning for what it is, okay? And do a comprehensive postmortem. Why didn't I do better? And how could I do better next time? It's very, very important. So don't try to make the undefensible something that you can justify. Don't twist the facts. Don't twist the outcomes to, you know, make yourself feel better. Use it as a learning opportunity to actually get better, okay? So you won't have many of these opportunities In the real world, once you get out of an academic environment like this where we can conduct these negotiations in a laboratory setting, you won't have very many opportunities where you can make these apples to apples laboratory environment types of comparisons. Milk it for all it's worth. Okay, so once again, a reminder, course ends 11:59 p.m. Friday, July 13th. Make sure all your Module 8 work is in before that deadline, because I have a very tight turnaround time to get final grades calculated and into the registrar. I hope you're enjoying Module 8, and best wishes as you come down the home stretch here.